I'd like to start by welcoming everyone joining us today. Welcome to Reach Lawyer. We are a collective and organization of lawyers and other stakeholders involved in issues relating to civil liberties and issues relating to human rights. And through the course of the coming weeks and months, it is our hope to start conversations on a lot of issues that are plaguing us today, especially at a time where there seems to be an attack on the civil liberties and human rights that we've come to cherish for so long. Before we start today's discussion on Pillorying the Poet, I'd like to share a small video of a poem by the renowned satirist and poet Gohar Raza.
धर्म में लिपटी वतन परस्ती क्या क्या स्वांग रचाएगी। मसली कलियां झुलसा गुलशन जर्द खिजा दिखलाएगी। धर्म में लिपटी वतन परस्ती क्या क्या स्वांग रचाएगी। मसली कलियां झुलसा गुलशन जर्द खिजा दिखलाएगी। यूरोप जिस वहशत से अब भी सहमा सहमा रहता है, खतरा है वो वहशत मेरे मुल्क में आग लगाएगी। खतरा है वो वहशत मेरे मुल्क में आग लगाएगी। जर्मन गैस कदों से अब तक खून की बदबू आती है। जर्मन गैस कदों से अब तक खून की बदबू आती है। अंधी वतन परस्ती हमको उस रास्ते ले जाएगी। अंधी वतन परस्ती हमको उस रास्ते ले जाएगी। अंधे कुएं में झूठ की नाव तेज चली थी मान लिया। अंधे कुएं में झूठ की नाव तेज चली थी मान लिया। लेकिन बाहर रोशन दुनिया तुमसे सच बुलवाएगी। लेकिन बाहर रोशन दुनिया तुमसे सच बुलवाएगी। नफरत में जो पले बड़े हैं, नफरत में जो पले बड़े हैं, नफरत में जो खेले हैं, नफरत देखो आगे आगे उनसे क्या करवाएगी। नफरत देखो आगे आगे उनसे क्या करवाएगी। फनकारों से पूछ रहे हो क्यों लौटाए हैं सम्मान। फनकारों से पूछ रहे हो क्यों लौटाए हैं सम्मान। पूछो कितने चुप बैठे हैं शर्म उन्हें कब आएगी। पूछो कितने चुप बैठे हैं शर्म उन्हें कब आएगी। ये मत खाओ वो मत पहनो इश्क तो बिल्कुल करना मत। ये मत खाओ वो मत पहनो इश्क तो बिल्कुल करना मत। देशद्रोह की छाप तुम्हारे ऊपर भी लग जाएगी। देशद्रोह की छाप तुम्हारे ऊपर भी लग जाएगी। ये मत भूलो, ये मत भूलो अगली नस्लें रोशन शोला होती हैं। आग को रेदोगे चिंगारी दामन तक तो आएगी। आग को रेदोगे चिंगारी दामन तक तो आएगी।
Good evening, everyone. I'm Prerna, and I welcome you all to the third part of the series, Why Impunity Reigns on Pillorying the Poet. For today's discussion, we are joined by advocate and scholar B.T. Venkatesh and a renowned Kannada poet, Miss Mamta Sagar. From Malcolm X and Toni Morrison to Faiz Ahmad Faiz, history is replete with acts of lyrical rebellion that have shaken the foundations of political structures, inspiring millions of people to act and fight for what is right. The iconic act of Iqbal Bano singing Hum Dekhenge to speak out against the dictatorship of Zia ul Haq in Pakistan for a fully packed hall, clapping and chanting Inkilab Zindabad, is a story that provides hope of reinstalling the collective faith in humanity. A momentous act of rebellion that also found its way to its India counterpart during the nationwide protests against CAA and NRC. Sadly, history is also replete with punitive actions taken against artists and poets for using their imagination and the simplicity of their words to speak truth to power and incite desire to think and want better for the world we all live in, especially when liberal imagination is under siege. Poetry conveys what is deeply felt, but is essentially unsayable. It stands in contrast with history and work because it is outside the realm of cause and effect. The use of poetry is to value those things that are unpragmatic and unmundane. Poetry is essentially nothing but spontaneous lyrical expression of inner truth. Poetry sets forth a desire that can never be bound by laws and legislations because it reminds humans of its humanity and its spirit. As Robert Frost once said, a poet has a lover's quarrel with the world. She criticizes because she loves what is being lost. In the Republic, the ancient Greek philosopher Plato infamously banned poets from his utopian city state. He uses the example of a painting to establish that poets are mimetic artists and therefore they do not speak the truth. In Book 10, he gives the example of a bed or a couch according to different translations. There is the idea of a perfect bed, and then there is the bed that the carpenter makes, and finally the bed that the artist paints. Surely the painting is artificial, and the creator of such a painting or a work of art, that is an artist or a poet, is a creator of untruths. India seems to have turned this platonic anxiety on its head, making the utterance of truth a difficult endeavor in this country. The last few years, India has seen widespread persecution of activists, like scholars, poets, writers, and artists, and most recently, the trial of Vasava Rao, who has spent his last 8 years of his life going in and out of prison for politically motivated, fabricated cases with no fair trial visible in the future. The tale of Mia poets from Assam who have set out to reclaim their identity and culture amongst lost stories of their people. Write Down I Am a Mia by Hafiz Ahmad, a seminal piece that maps the shifting landscape of migrant laborers across the Indo Bangladesh border. The poetry attempts to reconstruct the memory lost by this migration and captures the anxiety of the NRC process that strips them of their names and reduces them to stateless and nameless beings. Poetry written in times of revolution are to reaffirm humanity. For poetry is not about facts, but about the truth. It's about freedom and the truth staring back at you. These beg the questions of what does truth mean, especially in a binary and post-truth world. What space does poetry hold in revolutionary and spaces of dissent? What does it mean to freely express thoughts and imagination and fight for the same in a receding democracy like ours? And lastly, why is the state scared of poetry? With this, I invite Mr. B.T. Venkatesh to share his thoughts on the ruthless persecution of poets by the state. And then I invite Ms. Mamta Sagar to share her experiences and discuss some of her sensational poems written in Kannada with us. We will then open the floor for questions and discussions.
Very good evening. Pillorying the poet. Why poets are being pilloried? History is replete with number of poets, number of authors, journalists, thinkers persecuted, killed, sentenced to life imprisonment, tortured, abused. You name the way the state uses the force against them. Why it happens? In fact, they have been looking at this for centuries. And one of the most important thing which we see is that did this poet write something very obscene? No. Did this poet write something which was unacceptable in by any moral standards? No. Did this poet say something which was absolutely falsehood? No. But why he is being persecuted? In fact, this is something which would make tons of difference, that why we have this kind of persecution of the poets. In fact, persecution of poet is happening for centuries. You go to the history of the world, you see for centuries they have been persecuted. Anyone who rises, in fact, we have this slogan, a statement that philosophers' flight is one thing which we say, and there's also a poet's flight. We have seen in the history, we have seen Faiz Ahmad Faiz going exile. We have seen Ahmad Faraz going exile. We have seen in Pakistan the number of poets, thinkers being sent to jail. We have seen across the globe, across the countries, people being sent to jail, being languishing in prison for years on end. We have seen the case of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who was persecuted. We have seen the story of Boris Pasternak, who could not receive the Nobel Prize. He even made a statement as against the Nobel Prize that it was a conspiracy of capitalists to award him Nobel Prize. When you look at this history of this world, you come across one thing loud and clear. What's loud and clear is that once those who talk the truth, that truth which you feel uncomfortable, that truth which the state feels so difficult because it's going to make people aware of their rights. This is going to make that speaking of truth, going to make people understand what their present situation is. Yes, they are persecuted. They are persecuted to such a degree, it's unimaginable. I think one of the most important thing we come across is the kind of persecution which we see. And we have few examples to give you. We have the story of Galal el-Bahri, a poet, an Egyptian poet, who is in prison for last 2.5 years. He is in prison for 2.5 years. For what reason? He wrote a poem by name Balaha. Balaha was a poem which spoke of the rights of the people. It spoke of the people who question the authority of the state. In fact, he makes a statement: pharaohs were undone by slaves. The authorities which violate law, the authorities which take away the rights of the people are going to face consequences, are going to see a change. The change will happen. You cannot stop that change from happening. He wrote one poem and he's in prison for last 2.5 years. In fact, there is Khalil Gibran's poem, which is most famous poem, which says that you can imprison me, but you can't imprison my thoughts. In fact, we have so many poets who have been imprisoned, who have been persecuted, who had to go on exile because they said what they believed in. This is something which is part of our history. In fact, we have this narrative which the host, Prerna, made a statement regarding Faiz Ahmad Space's poetry, which is almost like an anthem for all those people who ask for civil liberties, who demand for rights, who demand for democracy, who demand for free speech. Such kind of a poem. For that he was imprisoned. For that he had to exile. The copies of that song were destroyed. The audio tape of Iqbal Bono's rendition of the same was destroyed. It was sneaked into Dubai and was circulated to a number of people. But you cannot stop that. His voice cannot be silenced. In fact, this is something which is part of the history of the world. State tries to silence the voices. But the voice of this poet, it's very difficult to close. We have the story of Ken Saro-Wiwa, who gave his life for what he believed in. You have lives of so many poets who have given their life, who have stood by the truth, who have made the statement, but they have been pilloried. Then I have given an example of Nur Muhammad Yasin, a Uyghur poet in China. He wrote a story called Wild Pigeon. Wild Pigeon did not make a big story, it's a very small story. The story talks in terms of a wild pigeon, which does not be tamed, which cannot be tamed, which believes in its identity, which believes in its pedigree, which believes in its culture, it believes in its freedom. When it says that when it is caught, it will say that, no, I am not going to compromise my freedom. I am not compromise my liberty. I will not do that. You cannot take away my voice. It says I would rather commit suicide and die. I'll die rather than be subject to as a slave. I will not be a slave. I will not be tamed. I will not come into a situation which would put me into a situation where I do not have my identity. I cannot lose my identity. In fact, that poem spoke regarding the angst, the anxiety, the pain of the Uyghurs. That was something which was writ large in that story. And for that story, which is one of the finest stories which we have in the recent times, he has been imprisoned. He was found guilty in 2005 for a 10-year sentence. He was supposed to be released in 2015. There were news in 2011 that he's no more and that he's dead in the prison. Then in 2012, some relative had gone to prison and heard that this person is alive, the poet is good, and he is in prison. So there is some information that he was alive in 2012. The family has not seen for a decade where this poet is. Now it's 2020. 5 years more than the said sentence. Was he sentenced to 10 years? Was he sentenced to 15 years? We do not know. How long he'll be there in prison? We do not know. Is he still there, alive? We do not know. Why this happens? Why state is scared of him? Then we have our own Varvara Rao. He was arrested. He's a poet who has been speaking on rights, who has been part of civil liberties movement, who has been talking about through his poetry regarding the rights of the people are concerned. He has been arrested earlier. He has been sent into prison earlier. He has been acquitted of the charges which have been leveled against him. Now he is again in prison. For 2.5 years he's in prison. He's 80 plus, not keeping well. COVID positive to add to. His bail is yet being heard. Let's say, is it a travesty of justice? Or is it a situation where the state does not want the freedom to this particular poet to speak his mind? Because he speaks his mind. He speaks truth. I think this is something which has been intriguing us. Why? A poet is persecuted to such degrees. Why a poet becomes such a threat to the state? In fact, I've been delving, I've been thinking about this kind of construct. When I tell all these narratives through, whether it's that of Dostoevsky or anyone, the history is replete with poets, authors, journalists who have been speaking, and for their speech, they have been killed. This is something not new. We have seen people have given their life, but they have stood by these words. Many a time they have been imprisoned. Many a time they have been sentenced. Many a time they have been done to death by the state. Across the globe, it's not here. It's not that it happens in India. It happens everywhere in the world. Why the state feels so threatened? It's something which always have questioned. In fact, many of us need to think in this particular aspect more so. In fact, when I was reading the other day a poem of a well-known Telugu poet, which reads this way, I would rather tell it in Telugu. తల్లి మాటను చెవిన పెట్టక బయలుదేరిన బాటసారికి ఎంత కష్టం కూటి కోసం కూలి కోసం పట్టణంలో బ్రతుకుదామని తల్లి మాటను చెవిన పెట్టక బయలుదేరిన బాటసారి ఎంత కష్టం. It talks about a person coming from a village to make life in city, some life in city, against the words of the mother that don't leave the house and go. He comes, he expects to make at least some living, survive in the city, and it does not happen. At the end of the poem, this person who has come from the village is dead. Only the smell of the death goes to his village to inform his mom that he is no more. A kind of poem which makes us think what the conditions of the poor in our society is concerned. In fact, when you look at this poem, which was written long ago, almost close to 90 years ago, today, even as on this day, this song is relevant. When you talk in terms of the plight of the migrant labor, 15 million migrant labor, 150 million migrant labor which we have in this country, 150 million laborers across the globe. There's so many millions. I was hearing about the plight of the workers in USA. I was listening about the plight of workers in of South Africa yesterday in this webinar, the conditions which are in. The song is for all of them, universal in its application. It talks in terms of name, a poem which is so pure, a poem which talks the truth and which is relevant. He is speaking the truth. He is explaining the truth. He is making us understand what the plight is. It hurts our conscience. It makes us think. It makes us act. It makes us ask questions. I think that's the place where the state feels threatened. That's where the state wants the person to be prosecuted. The state feels that continued presence of this person may cause trouble. So therefore, he may influence more number of people. So for that reason, they are implicated. They are sentenced. They have to serve sentences in prison. Many a time they have been pushed. They have been litigated. In fact, our own poet in Karnataka, Dara Bendre, was sentenced for sedition, for writing one poem, Kurudu Kanchana Kuniyuttalittu, Darige Bandam Tuliyuttalittu. He says the power of money, the power of authority is so powerful that it kills anybody comes in its way. It will not tolerate dissent. So when you talk in terms of poet, he is a dissenting voice. When I'm talking of a poet, is he a person who's talking truth? When I'm talking about a poet, is he talking to my heart to understand, communicating to me? Yes, he does all this. He does all this and he expresses his opinion very clear and loud and in so many few words. And that's the difference. And that words are understood, repeated, sung, shared. I think that's something which, whether it's Bella Ciao, Hasta Sampiere, you name any of them, all of them, any language for that matter in the globe, you come across this kind of poetry and you come across such kind of poets who changed, influenced our thought. And it's part of our history, our heritage, whether it's talking in terms of Subramanya Bharati, whether you're talking in terms of so many wonderful poets we had who have spoken for the purposes of truth, demanding that we're entitled to freedom, demanding that we're entitled to liberty, and that continues to do even as on this day. It continues to affect our societies even as on this day. I think for that particular reason, the poet is persecuted. He is found to be a threat to the society. I feel there is a need for all of us to understand and talk, stand for this poet, stand for this kind of right which he has, stand for the values which he espouses, stand for values which he is talking about, our values, our rights are concerned, our expression is concerned. I feel that makes the reason that we have today a talk of this nature. We have today a presentation of this nature. Today we have with us Mamta Sagar. Mamta Sagar is a dear friend, a well-known poet, and he conducts so many programs on poetry. In fact, we have every Thursday evening, she has a program called Kavya Sanjay. Almost across the globe, poets participate, whether it's Arab, whether it's Macedonian, whether it is Turkish, whether it is Kashmiri, whether it is Indian, whether it is Indonesian, Mongolian, you have across the world who come and participate in her program Kavya Sanjay. Every Thursday evening he has a program. It's available on the Rich Lawyer website as well. So this person, Mamata, has been and such a person who has been writing poetry for the purpose of life. She is expressing her dissent. In fact, my beloved friend who was shot down, Gauri Lankesh, she was also a good close friend of Mamta Sagar. It's a mutual friend of ours. She was shot down for speaking the truth. She was shot down because she said this country, secularism, has to be the only value. Other things are not acceptable. She said that freedom of expression cannot be taken away. She said, I cannot be silenced. And she was silenced. She was shot. 7 bullets pierced her one fine evening, a couple of years ago. Mamata wrote a poem. Today we are going to start Mamata's talk with that poem, that song of Gauri, that song of sacrifice of Gauri, that song of her efforts to make the voice of the poorest of the poor, most marginalized, most excluded in the society, heard. That voice of the person who has no voice at all, she had space in her magazine. She was talking about him, his rights, and he questioned the state. She questioned the authorities when anyone affected their right. She was always presence felt. She was compassionate. Her personified, she personified compassion. She personified dissent. She personified democracy. She personified the whole construct of equality. Today, you're going to listen to that song. Mamata gave an amazing tribute to Gauri, and her song you're going to hear now.
धड़ धड़ा धड़ धड़ा धड़ धड़ा धड़ धड़ा धड़ धड़ा इसी गुंडू धड़ धड़ा इसी गुंडू ಒಂದಲ್ಲ ಎರಡಲ್ಲ ಸಾಲಾಗಿ ಏಳು ಒಂದಲ್ಲ ಎರಡಲ್ಲ ಸಾಲಾಗಿ ಏಳು ತೂರಿದ್ದು ಗೌರಿಗೆ ತಾಕಿದ್ದು ನಮ್ಮೆದೆಗೆ ತೂರಿದ್ದು ಗೌರಿಗೆ ತಾಕಿದ್ದು ನಮ್ಮೆದೆಗೆ ಧಡ ಧಡ ಇಸಿ ಗುಂಡು ಧಡ ಧಡ ಇಸಿ ಗುಂಡು ಹರಿವ ರಕ್ತದ ಕೊಡಿ ನಿಲ್ಲಲೊಲ್ಲದು ನೋಡಿ ಹರಿವ ರಕ್ತದ ಕೊಡಿ ನಿಲ್ಲಲೊಲ್ಲದು ನೋಡಿ ಹೆಪ್ಪುಗಟ್ಟಿದ ನೋವು ನೀಗಲೊಲ್ಲದು ನೋಡಿ.
ಯಾವ ಕೋಮು ಸೌಹಾರ್ದಕ್ಕಾಗಿ ಆಶಿಸ್ತಾ ಗಾಂಧಿ ತಮ್ಮ ಜೀವನನೇ ಬಲಿ ಕೊಟ್ರು, ಯಾವ ಸಮಾನತೆ ಸಿಗದೆ ರೋಹಿತ್ ವೆಮುಲ ದೂಡಲ್ಪಟ್ನೋ, ಅದು ನಮಗೆ ಹತಾಶೆ ಹಾಕೂಡ್ದು. ಭಾರತನ ಒಂದು ಸೌಹಾರ್ದ ಮತ್ತು ಸಮಾನತೆ ದೇಶ ಕಟ್ಟೋದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಪಣ ತೊಡೋಣ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ.
ಹೆಪ್ಪುಗಟ್ಟಿದ ನೋವು ನೀಗಲೊಲ್ಲದು ನೋಡಿ ಹೆಪ್ಪುಗಟ್ಟಿದ ನೋವು ಮೀಗಲೊಲ್ಲದು ನೋಡಿ. ಏನಾಯ್ತು ಯಾಕಾಯ್ತು ಹೇಗಾಯ್ತು ಕೇಳದಿರಿ, ಉಸಿರು ನಿಲ್ಲುವ ಮುನ್ನ ಮಾತಾಡಿರಿ ಮಾತಾಡಿರಿ. ಧಡ 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 ಪ್ರೀತಿ ಬಿತ್ತಲು ಬಂದ ಎಲ್ಲರನ್ನೂ ಕೊಲ್ಲುವರು, ಪ್ರೀತಿ ಬಿತ್ತಲು ಬಂದ ಎಲ್ಲರನ್ನೂ ಕೊಲ್ಲುವರು. ದ್ವೇಷ ಬಿತ್ತಲು ಇವರು ಮುಂದಾದರು, ದ್ವೇಷ ಬಿತ್ತಲು ಇವರು ಮುಂದಾದರು. ಯಾರಿವರು ಯಾರಿವರು ನಾವಲ್ಲ ನೀವಲ್ಲ. ಸಾಕಿನ್ನು ಸಾಕಿನ್ನು ಸತ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ಗುರಿಯಿಟ್ಟ ಈ ಸಾವಿನಾಟ, ಸತ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ಗುರಿಯಿಟ್ಟ ಈ ಸಾವಿನಾಟ. ಧಡ 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 ಇಸಿ ಗುಂಡು ಧಡ ಧಡ ಇಸಿ ಗುಂಡು. ಒಂದಲ್ಲ ಎರಡಲ್ಲ ಸಾಲಾಗಿ ಏಳು ಒಂದಲ್ಲ ಎರಡಲ್ಲ ಸಾಲಾಗಿ ಏಳು. ಸಪ್ತ ಸ್ವರಗಳ ಹಾಗೆ ಎದೆ ಸೀಳಿ ನೋವ ಹೊತ್ತು, ಸಪ್ತ ಸ್ವರಗಳ ಹಾಗೆ ಎದೆ ಸೀಳಿ ನೋವ ಹೊತ್ತು ಹಾಡಾಯ್ತು ಈ ಹೊತ್ತು ನೋವಾಯದೆಯೊಳಗೆ ಹೊತ್ತು ನೋವಾಯದೆಯೊಳಗೆ ಬನ್ನಿ ಪ್ರೀತಿ ತನ್ನಿ ಬನ್ನಿ ಪ್ರೀತಿ ತನ್ನಿ ಬನ್ನಿ ಪ್ರೀತಿ ತನ್ನಿ.
Well, pillorying the poet, I think I would like to begin from this version of this song. ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ. ಈ ಪದ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ಹಲವಾರು ಆಯಾಮಗಳಿವೆ, ಹಲವಾರು ವರ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ಇದೆ. ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ತುಂಬ ಜನ ಈ ಪದ್ಯವನ್ನ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆಯವರು ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಥರದಲ್ಲಿ ತಮ್ಮ ಡಾಕ್ಯುಮೆಂಟ್ರಿಗೆ ಉಪಯೋಗಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ನ್ಯೂಸಿಗೆ ಉಪಯೋಗಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. So the poem has just moved away from its original version, and thanks to Vasu Dikshit and Bindu Malini and their team for singing this and making it a song for Gauri. And this is something which is very painful to talk about. But exactly like this version of it may be an extract from some other bigger documentary or video. Is it Prerna? I don't know. Must be. And there is another version of the poem. And when this poem was being written and it was being used by medias, used by news and used by everywhere, I got a phone call from somewhere. And this person, a man, was asking me how big a liar I was. I was telling so much of lies in this poem, and why the hell did I have to write this poem for somebody, blah, 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 blah. And I was asked, the lie that I've told in the poem is, according to that person, it is only 4 bullets that killed Gauri, not 7. See, the whole notion of death, torture, authority, or the kind of subjugation, these, the poetry is something, it is something that shows you what it is. It is a kind of a document. Whatever history marginalizes, I think poetry has always imbibed it. It has been talking about everything that has been left out by the mainstream history, because history we should understand, and we know that it has been all the time, in every junctures of history, it has been modified. It has been constructed by those who are in the mainstream, who have the power to rule and power to marginalize people. So every juncture, history keeps changing. So that is happening right now. We are going through that. Right from the textbooks to history being misinterpreted. History itself doesn't have everything in it, because it is one version of the documentation. So other versions of documentations that are left out are done by arts, visual arts, done by photography, done by films, and poetry is one very, very important documentation, very important voice that would voice that left out things of history. Nanu Kannadadalli, I am a poet writing in Kannada. I don't write in any other language, but I do translate in and out. As a principal, I write only in Kannada, but I also write in English, but not as a poet. But I do write as an academic and as essayist and other things, and political writings I do in English. But as a poet, I do only in Kannada. So if you see this particular poem that I wrote for Gauri, it's called For Gauri. If you Google it as For Gauri, you get versions of the poem. Okay. So that also shows, now the minute I write this poem and dedicate it, I just leave it like that. Because poem, you should not realize, for me as a poet, poem is something that happens, not that which is written on the page. It happens through singing. It happens through connecting. It happens through oppressing the poem itself, oppressing the words, by that oppressing the voices of people who would like to voice. So by using the poems in different forms also is a mode for voicing resistance. So it could be a poem written by Mamta Sagar, it could be a poem written by XYZ, whoever, but getting that poem in whatever time the poem could have been written, because we already know that during the CAA protests, how Fayaz's poem Hum Dekhenge just went like wildfire everywhere, and I did translate that poem, and Pallavi, MD Pallavi and Bindu Malini sang it, and it was a moment where we were in front of town hall singing that poem, and I'm getting goosebumps when I say that, because they are amazing singers. The poem not just happens because a poet writes. Poem happens when people use it. Poem happens when singers sing it. Poem happens when groups of people sing it. Groups of people use it for something else, to voice their resistance, to talk about how state is so oppressive. So, the poem itself, for example, Fayaz's Hum Dekhenge, the poem itself was the poem itself was being pilloried. It's not the poet. The poem in itself was being said that it is anti-national poem. So the poem was put to jail. Poem was not expected to be used. The poem was like treated as if it was a threat. Then what did it happen? Everybody started using the poem. They started translating into all the languages, because this whole threat of being pilloried was to be contested. That was contested through the poem that was pilloried. So, I have been writing since many years. I've been writing all kinds of poems. But like the time in which we are living right now, and all of us are living right now, makes you respond through your words. So when you weave a poem, when you write a poem, the listener, the person who uses the poem should be able to see the poem. It is a kind of painting through words, making portraits of the time through words. So therefore, because why I'm saying this is, words have meanings. Language is a very important thing. At the same time, language is being used by the authority. Language is used by those groups that resist the authority. So both sides the language is being used. Like usually, the poets are, when in general in English or in Kannada you speak, you say the poet, he is somebody who is writing this thing. Poet, when the poet writes, he will be targeted. It's a she poet who is talking to you right now, and even the gender, the language is so patriarchal. The understanding of the world is so patriarchal. It's so feudal. It's so, all kinds of authorities are celebrated through language itself. Therefore, it's important for us to use that language as a tool to contest whatever is being said. Poetry probably does that. I really don't know. I've been writing poems. And I've been translating a lot from all over the world. I've been inviting people who are going through similar kind of historical, social, and political junctures like we are going through, and sharing with them, sharing their poems also gives you a picture of what you are going through, what we are going through here in our spaces. So to begin with, I would like to offer one particular poem, which I had written long back, sometime in probably 2000, before 2014. No, before I had written probably immediately after 2002. Okay, so after 2002, when I say after 2002, 2002 is a juncture. a political juncture where Babri Masjid was pulled down. And now 2020, something is happening there. You know, it again has become an issue. That too during the pandemic, when people cannot go out, everybody is silenced. I mean, people have, in a way, you know, they have kept themselves inside the doors because of health and other things. But something else is happening in the world. And so I would like to read this poem to begin with. You know, I would like to read the footnote first and then read the poem. I'll read the footnote in English, read the Kannada poem in original, and then probably I'll read the translation. The year 2002 saw the worst communal clashes in modern Indian history, perhaps next only to those witnessed during the days of partition. These riots were triggered by the Hindu fundamentalist political organizations in Godhra, Gujarat in 2002. Most of the victims were women who were dragged out of their homes, gang raped, then murdered. No period in the history marks this kind of butchery displayed against women. Innocent people from both Muslim and Hindu communities suffered. This poem is a response to that violence. ಧರ್ಮ ಧರ್ಮದ ಮಾತು. ದೇವದೇವ ಮಹಾದೇವ ಹರ 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 ಮಹಾದೇವ. ಹರ ಹರ ಮಹಾದೇವ ಒಡಲ ಹರಿದು ಛಿದ್ರಗೊಳಿಸಿದ ವಿಷಕಂಠ. ಕಂಠದ ವಿಷ ನರನಾಡಿಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕಹಿ ಮನಸ್ಸಿನ ಮೈಯೆಲ್ಲ ನೀಲಿ. ಆಕಾಶದುದ್ದಗಲಕ್ಕೂ ಹರಡಿ ನೀಲಿ. ಸಮುದ್ರದಾಳದ ಹವಳ ಮುತ್ತುಗಳೆಲ್ಲ ನೀಲಿ ನೀಲಿ ನೀಲಿ. ಸಾವ ತೊಟ್ಟಿಲಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಇಟ್ಟು ತೂಗುವ ಹೊತ್ತು. ಸಾವ ತೊಟ್ಟಿಲಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಇಟ್ಟು ತೂಗುವ ಹೊತ್ತು. ಹಾಯಿ ಹಾಯಿ ಜೋ ಜೋ ಜೋಕೆ ಕಂದ. ರಕ್ತ ಮಾಂಸದ ಮಡುವಿನಲ್ಲೇ ಹೊಳೆಯುತ್ತದೆ ಕಸಾಯಿಯ ಖಡ್ಗ. ನಾಭಿಯಿಂದೆರಡಿಂಚು ಕೆಳಗೆ. ನಾಭಿಯಿಂದೆರಡಿಂಚು ಕೆಳಗೆ ಥಳ ಥಳಿಸುವ ಮೊನಚು ಸರ್ರಂತ ಸಿಗಿದು ಅಯ್ಯೋ ಅನ್ನುವುದಕ್ಕೆ ಮೊದಲೇ ಪುರುಷಾರ್ಥ ಸಿದ್ಧಿ. ಮೊಲೆಗೂ ಯೋನಿಗೂ ಮೊಲೆ ಹಾಲಿಗೂ ತಡೆ ಹಿಡಿದ ರಕ್ತಸ್ರಾವಕ್ಕೂ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆಯ ಅರ್ಥ ಧರ್ಮ ಕಾರಣದಲ್ಲಿ. ಕೈ ಕಾಲು ರುಂಡ ಮುಂಡಗಳ ಜೊತೆ ಪ್ರೀತಿ ಪ್ರೇಮ ದುಗುಡ ದುಮ್ಮಾನಗಳು ರಕ್ತ ಸಿಕ್ತ. ನೋವಿಗೊಂದಷ್ಟು ನಿದ್ದೆ, ದ್ವೇಷದ ಬದಲು ಕೊಂಚ ಕಣ್ಣೀರು, ಹೃದಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಚೂರು ಕರುಣೆ. ಒಂದು ಚೂರು ಕರುಣೆ ಇರುವುದು ಧರ್ಮ, ಇಲ್ಲದಿದ್ದರೆ ಎಲ್ಲವೂ ಅಧರ್ಮ. Talking about dharma, adharma, translated by Chitra Padikar. Hara Hara Mahadeva chants from the throats filled with poison. Rends these bodies, poison in the throat, seeps into the vein. Mind's poison rends the body blue, spreads the blue across the sky, turns the corals and pearls in the ocean's depth blue. This is the time the cradle of death swings with a lullaby. La, 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 lullaby. Child, take care. The butcher's knife glistens. Glistens in the pool of flesh and blood, just 2 inches below the navel. Sharpness slits through. Before the scream, manliness is proved and achieved. The breast, the vagina, breast milk, the monthly flow of blood, all have different meanings in the politics of dharma. Here, hands, feet, head, torso, love, affection, sorrow are all soaked in blood. A wink of sleep for the pain. A wink of sleep for the pain, a tear or two for the hated. A little compassion in the heart. That is dharma. So I had written this poem many, many years ago. I think it is relevant all through our time, because we have been watching all these every day, because people have been targeted, and people have been cornered, people have been arrested just for voicing their resistance. And when we come back to pillorying the poets, I would like to share a story with you. It was in 2010 or somewhere around that. I was invited to Slovenia for a translation workshop. I got to meet one of the finest poets, Beda from China. Beda was on exile when I met him. He's still on exile, many, many years since, and Beda was on exile because he wrote a poem. He just wrote a poem, and because of the poem, the Tiananmen Square movement started, and people started questioning the state. And the poem is titled as The Answer. I will just read a bit of the poem, and it's available online. You can go through that. Beidao, a poet from China who is on exile, writes this poem, The Answer. And after the answer is written, he's questioned, and he's on exile by the state. Debasement is the word of the base, nobility and epitaph of the noble. See how the glided sky is covered with the drifting, twisted shadows of the death. The ice age is over now. Why is there ice everywhere? I came into this world bringing only paper, rope, a shadow to proclaim before the judgment the voice that has been judged. Let me tell you, world, I do not believe. I do not believe the sky is blue. I do not believe in the thunder's echo. I do not believe the dreams are false. I do not believe that death has no revenge. If the sea is destined to breach the dikes, let all the Bakish water pour into my heart. If the land is destined to rise, let humanity choose the peak of existence again. They are pictographed from 5,000 years. A new conjunction and glimmering stars adorn the unobstructed sky now. They are pictographed from 5,000 years. They are the watchful eyes of future generation. This watchful eyes of future generation is something which Bedao talks about. He says, we are watching you. You can't just do anything with us. And the state puts him on exile. Poetry is, why does state do this? Why is the authority, whatever the authority is, whatever the rule is, whatever the regime is, why is it scared? It's not scared of guns or pistols or whatever, because they use it. It's scared of words. It's scared of poems. It's scared of people. It's scared of poetry. It's scared of voice of resistances. Why is that? It's only because poetry poetry condenses everything into images, series of images. People can see what is happening. People can recite what is happening. It just quickly moves out of poet's hands and flies everywhere. It gets the wings. Poetry gets voice. Poetry gets wings. Poetry in itself becomes a person. I don't want to call muse as a woman or poet as a man, but poetry is a wonderful tool that has been helping everyone. Within the Kannada context, we have seen how poetry has been working all through. Now, next I would like to also read a recent poet's poem. Because of this poem, Siraj Bisrali was condemned. He was put to jail and during the CAA protests. I would like to read the poem now to you. Ninna dhakale yavaga ನೀಡುತ್ತಿ Okay, you are asking me for all the documents. When will you give your documents? That's how the poem begins. I will not read the translation. ಆಧಾರು ರೇಷನ್ ಕಾರ್ಡುಗಳ ಕ್ಯೂನಲ್ಲಿದ್ದಂಥ ಸರ್ವರಿನ ಮಂಗನಾಟದಲ್ಲಿ ಬದುಕು ಕಳೆದುಕೊಳ್ಳುತ್ತಿರುವವರ ದಾಖಲೆ. ಕೇಳುವವನೇ, ನಿನ್ನ ದಾಖಲೆ ಯಾವಾಗ ನೀಡುತ್ತಿ? ನಾಡಿನ ಸ್ವಾತಂತ್ರ್ಯಕ್ಕಾಗಿ ನಗುನಗುತ್ತಲೇ ನೇಣಿಗೇರಿದವರ ಹೆಸರೂ ಬೇಡವೆಂದು ಹುತಾತ್ಮರಾದವರ ಇತಿಹಾಸದ ಹಾಳೆಗಳ ಹರಿಯುತ್ತಿರುವವನೇ, ನಿನ್ನ ದಾಖಲೆ ಯಾವಾಗ ನೀಡುತ್ತಿ? And it goes on like this. And then it says, ಪಕೋಡ ಮಾರಿ ಬದುಕಿದವನು, ಚಾ ಮಾರಿ ಬದುಕಿದವನು ನಿನ್ನೂರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಮನುಷ್ಯತ್ವ ಮಾರಿಕೊಂಡಿಲ್ಲ, ಸ್ವಾಭಿಮಾನ ಮಾರಿಕೊಂಡಿಲ್ಲ, ಸುಳ್ಳಿನ ಕಂತೆಗಳ ಕತೆ ಕಟ್ಟಿಲ್ಲ. ಹೇಳು, ನಿನ್ನ ದಾಖಲೆಗಳ ಯಾವಾಗ ನೀಡುತ್ತಿ? ದೇಶವನ್ನೇ ಯಾಮಾರಿಸಿದ ನಿನಗೆ ನಕಲಿ ದಾಖಲೆಗಳು ದೊಡ್ಡದಲ್ಲ ಬಿಡು. ಕನಿಷ್ಠ ಮನುಷ್ಯತ್ವವೂ ನಿನಗಿದೆ ಎನ್ನುವ ದಾಖಲೆ ಯಾವಾಗ ನೀಡುತ್ತಿ? And I love this poem because it ends with this concern and humanity. It is there in everyone, every other person, even in the people who make the state run, who plan or who work around how to how actually to pillorying the poet, also have a heart, also have a space where they can think of humanity. The poem ends with a thing that, when will you show that you also have a humanity? The poets and the poems, they are very, very important. And pillorying the poets happen because they come up with these kinds of simple but very tough questions that are put forth to the state, and the state would not want to answer these. The state would have already decided what has to be done, and therefore if there is an obstacle, the obstacle has to be removed. So poetry is a very big obstacle everywhere, all over. Well, I will go to my next poem, and this poem is something which I wrote. This poem actually came as a response to the arrest of 5 activists in India on the 28th of August 2018. And they were blamed by the state as urban Naxals. ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಹೇಳಬೇಕಾಗಿಲ್ಲ ನಾನು. ನಿಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಗೊತ್ತು, 28 ಆಗಸ್ಟಿನ 2018ರ ಟೈಮ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಅರೆಸ್ಟ್ ಆದವ್ರು ಯಾರು, ಅರೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ ಯಾರು, ಯಾತಕ್ಕಾಗಿ ಅರೆಸ್ಟ್ ಆದ್ರು, ಇನ್ನೂ ಹೇಗೆ ಅವರು ಸಫರ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತ. I will read the Kannada poem. ಅಗಳಿ ತಟ್ಟಿದ ಸದ್ದು, ಅಗಳಿ ತಟ್ಟಿದ ಸದ್ದು, ಹೊರಗು ಒಳಗು ಅಗಳಿ ತಟ್ಟಿದ ಸದ್ದು. ಈಚೆಯಿಂದ ತೆರೆವ ಬಾಗಿಲ ಆಚೆಯಿಂದ ತಳ್ಳಿ ಒಳನುಗ್ಗಿದ ಕತ್ತಲು, ಬೆಳಕ ಬೀದಿಗೆಳೆದು ರಸ್ತೆ ತುಂಬ ರಾದ್ಧಾಂತ. ಒಳಗು ಹೊರಗು ಒಳ ಹೊರಗು ಕತ್ತಲು ತುಂಬಿದಾಗ ಕಮ್ಮಗೆ ಕಂಬಳಿ ಹೊದ್ದು ಮಲಗಿದವರಿಗೆ ಕತ್ತಲ ಕೌದಿಯಡಿ ಹರಿವ ನೆತ್ತರ ಬಣ್ಣ ಕಾಣುವುದೇ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಆಗಾಗ ಆಗಾಗ ಕೇಳುತ್ತಿದ್ದ ಈ ಅಗಳಿ ತಟ್ಟಿದ ಸದ್ದು ಈಗ ಎಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲೂ ಕೇಳುತ್ತಿದೆ. ಅಗಳಿ ತಟ್ಟಿದ ಸದ್ದು. Knock on the door. Knock on the door from outside, from inside. Door that opens from this side is pushed forcefully from that side. Darkness barges in. Darkness barges in, drags the lights on the streets. Anarchy, turmoil, and utter chaos. When darkness spreads the inside out, those that sleep under their cozy, concealed blankets never see the red of the blood seeping under their dark sheets. Knock. Knocks not so frequent. Knocks not so frequent are now heard often from all sides. So, a poem holds the time. A poem holds the fear. A poem never fears. Words don't fear. Poem questions. Poem asks. Through poem, poet gives a possibility for people to ask questions. Well, what do? Recite this poem. Well, do they do this? Come to the square. Let us recite Hum Dekhenge. Let us recite it in Hindi, in English, in Kannada. Hum Dekhenge hadona. Now nodona anta nona. So, a poem is in itself is a tool again, you know. It can be used as a tool. It's not just a tool. It is beyond that. Poem is something, a poet can only make a poem. Poet cannot hold the poem. That is the quality of a poem. You know, but the state can hold people. State can suppress people. State can corner people. State can do whatever it wants. State can even pillorying people can be done by the state, but poem, they cannot. They just can't do anything to the poem. Poem does everything to everyone in given time and given history, given junctures of history. And therefore, people are worried about poems. If you have to stop the poem, you have to stop the poets. So how do you do that? Arrest them. Why do you do that? Finish them. Why do you finish them? Because they spread justice. They are so epidemic. They are so epidemic about freedom, voicing for freedom, voicing for everyone. You know, poetry is something that has done that. With this, I would like to now go to another poem, which I have recently written. Recently, in the sense, I take a long time to write poems. This poem is called, this was about, people were asking me, what will happen after pandemic? So we are all locked down and we are all under, like whatever, you know. I don't like this word social distancing. Physical distancing makes sense. Social distancing, I have been telling this every time and I would like to say it again and again, that social distancing is there in our country right from the beginning through caste, gender and whatnot. You know, hierarchies, economic hierarchy, social hierarchy, marginalization, everything has social distancing. And pandemic, you know, it was very easy for us to find words to deal with the pandemic. This is actually physical distancing. It's not social distancing. And therefore, I would now like to read this poem when I was just thinking, if people are calling this as social distancing, which is a physical distancing, what happens when the physical distancing is, we cross that? Maybe the social distancing gains a bigger form. Maybe, you know, we may have to start walking through, like, you know, like I am talking to you through a online platform. There could be cameras, there could be surveillance, there could be everything, you know, because as you know, people can identify your locations, they can do anything, you know. State is coming up with new projects where people can be surveilled. So this whole notion of surveillance is something which this poem talks about. This doesn't have a translation, so I would like to read this poem in Kannada. ಶಿಸ್ತಿನ ಶಾಂತಿ. ಪುಳಕ್ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಹನಿ ನೀರಿಗೆ ಬಿದ್ದರೆ ಅಷ್ಟೆತ್ತರದಿಂದ ಪ್ರಪಾತಕ್ಕೆ ಧುಮುಕಿದ ಹಾಗೆ ಕೇಳುತ್ತದೆ. ತಲೆಯೊಳಗೆ ತರಂಗಗಳೇಳುತ್ತವೆ. ಬಿಂಬ ಒಡೆದು ಬಿಡಿ ಬಿಡಿಯಾಗಿ ಹಿಂಜರಿದು ತುಣುಕು ಬಣ್ಣಗಳೆಲ್ಲ ಪಾರದರ್ಶಕವಾಗಿ ಕಳೆದು ಹೋಗುತ್ತವೆ. ಗಿರಕಿ ಹೊಡೆಯುತ್ತಾ ಬೆನ್ನಟ್ಟುವ ಎಲೆಗಳ ಬೀಸಿಗೆ ಹೆದರಿ ವಲಸೆ ಹೊರಟ ಹಳದಿ ಹೂಗಳ ಹಿಂಡು ಹಾದಿಯುದ್ದಕ್ಕೂ ಉದುರಿ ಒಣಗಿ ಬಿದ್ದಿವೆ ನೀರು ನೆಲೆ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ. ಗೋಡೆ ಮೇಲೆ ಒಣಗುತ್ತಿದೆ ಬಿಸಿಲ ತುಣುಕು. ಮನೆಯಲ್ಲಿದ್ದವರು ನೆನಪುಗಳನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಬಾಚಿಕೊಂಡು ನೆರಳ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನಡೆದಿರಬೇಕು. ನೆಮ್ಮದಿಯ ನೆಪದಲ್ಲಿ ನೆಮ್ಮದಿಯ ನೆಪದಲ್ಲಿ ನಜರು ದೇಖುರೇಕು. ಶಿಸ್ತಿನ ಈ ಶಾಂತಿ ಸಾಕಾಗಿದೆ. ವರ್ಚುವಲ್ ಆಗಿ ತಾರಾಡುವ ನಮಗೆ, ವರ್ಚುವಲ್ ಆಗಿ ತಾರಾಡುವ ನಿಮಗೆ, ನಮಗೆ ಕದ ತೆರೆದದ್ದೇ ಕಿಟಕಿ ಬಾಗಿಲುಗಳೆಲ್ಲ ಮುಚ್ಚಿ ಹೋಗಿ ಝೂಮಿಕೊಳ್ಳುತ್ತೇವೆ. ಬದುಕು ಝೂಮಿಕೊಳ್ಳುತ್ತದೆ, ಬದುಕು ನೆತ್ತಿಯ ಮೇಲೆ ಸುತ್ತುವ ನಿಗಾ ಖಾಯಮ್ಮಾಗಿ. ಡ್ರೋನುಗಳೊಳಗಿಂದ ಒಳ ಹೊರಗಿನ ಓಡಾಟ ಶುರುವಾಗಿ ಎಲ್ಲಿಲ್ಲದ ಹೊಸ ಹೊಸ ಕಾಳಜಿಗಳು ಮೊಳಕೆಯೊಡೆಯುತ್ತವೆ ಸರ್ವೇಲೆನ್ಸಿನ ಮಾಸ್ಕ್ ತೊಟ್ಟು. ಸದ್ದೇ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಸದ್ದೇ ಇಲ್ಲದ ಈ ಮೌನದ ಮಾತಿಗೆ ಬೆಚ್ಚಿ ಬಿದ್ದಿದ್ದೇನೆ. ಕಾಣದ್ದೆಲ್ಲ ಕಾಣುತ್ತಿದೆ, ಕಾಣದ್ದೆಲ್ಲ ಕಾಣುತ್ತಿದೆ, ಕೇಳದ್ದೆಲ್ಲ ಕೇಳುತ್ತಿದೆ. See, this is a poem which is kind of, with this kind of surveillance that we have been going through, which is being done by the state, the poems like this come up. And as we know, I would, apart from Siraj Bisrali, I'm just referring to some things because, if you don't know, you can go to online and look for it, and please know more about whatever I'm informing, because this is a forum which has defined time, so I don't want to just move beyond that. So I also talked to you and told you a bit about Bedav's poem and how Bedav is still under exile. And I would now want to also talk about Cheran Rudramurthy, who is on exile, who is a Tamil writer who was in Sri Lanka. He is no more in Sri Lanka. He cannot go to Sri Lanka. He is located in Canada. Cheran was talking about how the military state and the Sinhala state has been targeting Tamils and Tamil Muslims because, nowadays we have so got used to, like initially it was between Christianity and Islam. The whole world was, because the whole world was only Europe, okay, Europe and America. So it was juggling between Christianity and Islam. Now each one of us have defined ourselves as, we have not. We have been defined by the states as who we are. Our identities have been reworked on. So along the religious norms. So Cheran was talking about this, and I would like to read one of his poems here. I know that place, Cheran Rudramurthy. The place in the video now floating around on internet, you are desperately trying to identify. The sorry technicians of the administrators of war crimes stand empty-handed, baffled, because the documentaries provided to them by the superpower have no accuracy, no clarity, no luster, no information either. However, I know that place. I know that place, that stench, the trauma, the eyes darkened, rolling in terror, the muddy water from the sudden downpour of rain. I know that too. My tears are the color of that mud. I also know that half destroyed and the rest rubbed out, barely visible palay tree. On the left, under the ironwood tree, I know the smell of the still wet blood. A fling, a handful of earth upon the laughter that burst out when you dragged those women to plow them with your nationalistic pricks. I know that place. Other than my wet legs and fiery eyes that melts at the smell of that earth, what other proof do you need? I know that place, but I'm not going to tell you. Aa jaga nanage gottu. I have translated this poem into Kannada. I just fell in love with this poem because it is so relevant for today's time in India. Aa jaga nanage gottu. ವಿಡಿಯೋದಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾಣುವ ಆ ಜಾಗ, ಅಂತರ್ಜಾಲದ ತುಂಬ ಹರಿದಾಡುತ್ತಿರುವ ಆ ಜಾಗ, ಯಾವ ಆ ಜಾಗವನ್ನ ಗುರುತು ಹಿಡಿಯಲು ನೀನು ಒದ್ದಾಡುತ್ತಿದ್ದೀಯೋ ಆ ಜಾಗ ನನಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತು. ಯುದ್ಧಗಳ ನಿರ್ವಾಹಕರ ಸೋತ ತಂತ್ರಜ್ಞರು ಖಾಲಿ ಕೈಲಿ ನಿಂತು ತಬ್ಬಿಬ್ಬಾಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಏಕೆಂದರೆ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಸೂಪರ್ ಪವರ್ ಸರಬರಾಜು ಮಾಡಿರುವ ಕಿರುಚಿತ್ರಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ ನಿರ್ದಿಷ್ಟತೆಯೂ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಇಲ್ಲ ಸ್ಪಷ್ಟತೆ, ಇಲ್ಲ ಹೊಳಹು, ಸರಿಯಾದ ವಿವರ ಕೂಡ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಇರಲಿ, ನನಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತು ಆ ಜಾಗ. ಆ ದುರ್ನಾತ, ಗಾಯ, ಕಪ್ಪಿಟ್ಟ ಕಣ್ಣುಗಳು ತಿರುಗುತ್ತವೆ ಭಯದಲ್ಲಿ, ಇದ್ದಕ್ಕಿದ್ದಂತೆ ಸುರಿದ ಮಳೆಯಿಂದ ಕೆಸರಿಟ್ಟ ನೀರು. ನನಗೂ ಗೊತ್ತು ನನ್ನ ಕಣ್ಣೀರಿರುವುದು ಆ ಮಣ್ಣ ಬಣ್ಣ. ಅರೆ ಬರೆ ನಾಶವಾಗಿ ಉಳಿದಿದ್ದು ಅಳಿಸಿ ಹೋಗಿ ಈಗ ಕಣ್ಣಿಗೆ ಬೀಳದ ಹಾಗೆ ಇರುವ ಆ ಅಜಮರವೂ ಸಹ ನನಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತು. ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಎಡಕ್ಕಿರುವ ಭೋಗಿ ಮರದ ಬುಡಕ್ಕೆ ಇನ್ನು ಹಸಿ ಹಸಿಯಾಗೆ ಉಳಿದಿರುವ ರಕ್ತದ ಆ ವಾಸನೆ ಗೊತ್ತು ನನಗೆ. ನಿನ್ನ ರಾಷ್ಟ್ರೀಯತೆಯ ಮೊನಚು ನೇಗಿಲ ನಡೆಸಿ ಆ ಹೆಂಗಸರನ್ನ ಉಳುವ ಹುನ್ನಾರದಲ್ಲಿ ದರದರ ಎಳೆದೊಯ್ಯುತ್ತಾ ಗಹಗಹಿಸಿದ ನಿನ್ನ ಆ ನಗುವಿನ ಮೇಲೆ ಹಿಡಿ ಮಣ್ಣು ತೂರುತ್ತೇನೆ ನಾನು. ನನಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತು ಆ ಜಾಗ. ಅಲ್ಲಿಯ ಮಣ್ಣ ವಾಸನೆಗೆ ಕರಗುವ ಒದ್ದೆಯಾದ ನನ್ನ ಕಾಲುಗಳು, ಕೆಂಡ ಕಾರುವ ಕಣ್ಣುಗಳಿಗಿಂತ ಬೇರೆ ದಾಖಲೆ ಬೇಕೆ ನಿನಗೆ? ಆ ಜಾಗ ನನಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತು, ಆದರೆ ನಾ ಹೇಳುವುದಿಲ್ಲ ನಿನಗೆ. So this is a poem by Cheran, and Cheran has been writing a series of poems about what is happening in Sri Lanka. And we have many poets in India who are documenting, writing, talking, voicing through poetry here. And I would, and you know, why I read Cheran's poem in translation is, for poets, when sometimes you cannot express certain things, you know, you translate. Translation of poetry also helps you voice what you want to say, because translation is not just a replica. Whatever is happening in Cheran's poem is happening here in India. So me translating this poem into Kannada helps me to say what I want to, and my readers to see what they want to, what is happening. Saying and seeing and working the poem as a body, as a structure, as an entity does everything. So there is very less time. I would like to read, do I have little more time, Prerna? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. You can take
yeah.
about 2 to 3 minutes.
Yes. So I would like to now read one of my poem, which usually, you know, like political poems are not just, why does state actually, why is it pillorying the poets? It's not just because poets are talking only against the state. They are talking about truth. They are talking about what is happening. They are talking about caste. They are talking about gender. They are talking about issues. They are talking about everything which state has to watch and see and take care of. When state doesn't do that, and when it is shown, when it is mirrored, you know, you need to hide, and therefore poets are pillarized. And so I would like to read this particular poem. This is a poem between, I will start reading in Kannada. I can't explain the whole thing. I don't want to read the English translation. I would love to read this in Kannada. This is between two characters. Both of them fall in love. One wants to fly high, looking for the partner. The other wants to dive deep, looking for the partner. And they want to meet in opposite directions. Will that happen? That is the poem. And that has to happen. That is the poem. Yeah. Okay. This will be the last poem. Or maybe, you know, you can read this poem later. I would like to conclude. There is I'll read one para from this poem. ಆ ಕನಸು ಈ ಕನಸು ಕನಸುಗಳು ಬೆರೆತು ಒಂದರಲ್ಲೊಂದು ಎರಡು ಒಂದೇ ಅನ್ನೋ ಹಾಗೆ, ಒಂದರಲ್ಲಿದೆ ಎರಡಿದೆ ಅನ್ನೋ ಹಾಗೆ ಕನಸುಗಳು. ಅಷ್ಟಗಲ ಆಕಾಶದ ಆಚಿಂದೀಚೆ ಹುಡುಕಿದರೂ ಅವನ ಇರವಿಲ್ಲ. ಮೈಮೇಲಾಡಿದ ಮೃದು ಸ್ಪರ್ಶ, ಉದ್ದುದ್ದ ಬೆರಳು ನುಡಿಸಿದ ಮೋಹ, ಬಿಕೋ ಅನ್ನುವ ಆಕಾಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಕನಸುಗಳಿಗೆ ಜಾಗವಿಲ್ಲ. ಕೆಳಗೆ ನೀರೊಳಗೆ ಸುಳಿವ ಅವನು ಆಕಾಶದ ಅವಳ ಕಂಡು ಆಗಾಗ್ಗೆ ಜಿಗಿಯುತ್ತಾನೆ. ಅವಳು ಬಗ್ಗಿ ಬಂದು ಅಲೆ ಮೇಲೆ ಗಿರಕ್ಕೆ ಹೊಡೆಯುತ್ತಾಳೆ. ಜೊತೆಗಿದ್ದ ಕನಸು ಕೈಗೆಟುಕದ ನನಸು. ನನಸಿನ ಘಳಿಗೆ ಕನಸು ಒಡೆಯುತ್ತದೆ. ಈಗ ಕನಸಿನ ನೆನಪಷ್ಟೇ. ನನಸಾದ ಕನಸುಗಳಿಗೆ ಮತ್ತೆ ಕನಸಾಗೋ ಆಸೆ. ನನಸುಗಳು ಮತ್ತೆ ಕನಸು ಬೇಕಿದ್ದರೆ ಸಮುದ್ರ ಸೀಳಿ ಭೂಮಿ ಆಕಾಶಗಳು ಒಂದಾಗಬೇಕು, ಆಗಬೇಕು. Well, I will conclude by reading Varavar Rao's one of the poem. I will read it in English translation. Words, words, smoothed in the folds of the self, must be stirred away, made to amble and watch. See if wings can bear aloft the crippled limbs and soar into the sky. Like the first showers after the drought, to my parched ears, my own words, not any others, remain strange. Like the marvel of the sky discovering its lost monsoon, I long to sprout on a soil in the vibration of a sonorous world. Once again, I yearn to learn the utterance at school and on the commune. From pupil and plebeians, I dream of seizing syllables from each of history's furrow. Without this voicing peal, how will this silence, loaded for so long in the self, explode? Without this booming resonance, how will this scene, cryptic for so long in the eyes, scintillate? Once again, I must learn to utter in communing with and listening to our people. I must be tethered to the world and abide by it. What's man's legacy after betraying the world? Nothing debases the world. Nothing debases the word. The word. Nothing debases the word. In the blazing furnaces of time, under lamenting hammer clangs. This, as the fittest moment, I go on, foregoing expression. This was translated by Venkat Rao. Yes, thank you very much, Reach Lawyers. Thank you, dear friend Venkatesh, Prerna, and the team who are hosting me today. Thanks a lot. Yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was a very beautiful and insightful talk. It was a true privilege to have heard that. I'd like to open the floor for some questions and discussions. So firstly, I wanted to ask about what is the importance of regional poets and the importance of regional poetry coming up more in the forefront, especially for issues that are of national importance in a country as diverse as India. How do we still maintain secularity, and how do we still promote regional issues and causes through poetry?
Okay. First thing we have to understand is we are a diverse culture. We have to be an inclusive people. Okay. We cannot have one language as supreme to other languages, or we everything is equal, and we also should know that if you address the diversity only, then you can address the unity. If you are not addressing diversity, there is no unity in this world, particularly in this country, because we maintain diversity. So, and the whole notion of being secular has different definitions. But in India, being secular is not against something. It is inclusivity, you know. Secular spaces should allow people, allow voices, you know. You cannot, secular is being against marginalized. And there are many layers in being secular and layers of identities that we carry. So regional languages, regional literature, you know, because this whole notion of north versus north as against south, or Hindi as against other regional languages, or see, like every space, every culture is defined through its own flavor, you know, like food, you know. Even north is not one north. There is no homogeneity in anything in India. It is always heterogeneous. It is diverse. It is multiple. You know, so you can't define anything on one. If you have to address the issues of Dalit, there is no one thing, because even Dalit identities change, gender identities change, along caste, class, gender, and other attached identities. So, you know, in the regional languages, that way, you know, in a way, when the state, when the center tries to make it homogeneous, it's definitely an issue where we need to contest it. So wherever the homogeneity is forced upon someone, you find the regional language contesting it. And therefore, right now, today, I think most of the regional languages, Indian languages, including English, okay, languages are contesting issues, including Hindi. I'm not separating Hindi. There are many Hindis, you know, there are Urdus. Whatever you do, if you attach a religious identity to a language, or attach a regional identity to a language, attach a political identity to a language, it's not just that. That itself has a layered kind of identities. And therefore, the regional is everywhere, all over India, you know, the diverse. So the diverse inclusivity, the notion of inclusivity and notion of being diverse to maintain unity, being very diverse in the celebrating diversity to maintain unity is something which is very important in today's time. And to express that, I think all the languages are speaking. And that's how it is. That's what I think.
Thank you so much. So, would you like to say something?
Yes, I'm extremely thankful to Mamta. In fact, we have an expression in Hindi and Urdu, Hindustani, which I would say, "Meri muh ki baat chhin li."
Thank you.
Which is diverse. We live in a country which has diverse culture, language, food, dress, temperature, climate, you name it. It's such a wonderful place. It's a microcosm of everything that you see. We also have challenges. We also have issues, whether it's of Kashmir, whether it's of Tamil, whether it is that of a Mizo, whether it's that of a Naga, whether it's of any community, Dalit, women issues. You talk in terms of the kind of issues, range of issues.
And the transgender, for example.
Every particular.
Yeah. And you know, Venkatesh, I would like to say here that it's very easy if you are in a privileged position, if you belong to upper class, upper caste, you are a man, and you are in you believe in the ideology of the mainstream, whatever, who are, it's very easy to enjoy that. But shut that off and respect the diversity is something we need to learn. The country needs to learn today, you know. And it's suddenly the migrant workers, you know, they have been going through this, you know. Suddenly after this, everybody is talking about the migrant workers. You know, after 377, everybody wanted to talk about the transgenders, you know. And when I had invited one of the black poets into Kavya Sanjay, she was saying that black lives matters. It did matter all the time. Why are you asking now? Of course, you know, marginalization because of the caste is being done in India since 100 years, ages ago, and we tend to maintain that. Should we not look at under our nose? It's important for us to learn how we need to be more diverse, more inclusive. Otherwise, I mean, you can't talk about some other country when you're under your palm, you are doing this discrimination to people around you. Women, transgenders, people from the marginalized class, caste, religious backgrounds. Today, people from the religious backgrounds, the marginalized backgrounds are the most vulnerable, and they have been targeted. Now, if you don't see that, if you don't stand by them, what is the use of talking about being secular or talking about whatever in this country?
Floyding. We have been telling about floyding. Floyding is not just a section of society. Floyding is an attitude that we face, an attitude of the majoritarian state, an attitude of the powerful authority, an attitude of the authority which has little respect for rights are concerned. When Mamta speaks, she's speaking for all of us. She's speaking for that hijra. She's talking to that particular lesbian, a gay person. She's talking about that Shudra. She's talking about that Dalit. She's talking about that women of so many colors. She's talking of the poor. She's talking of the persons who have been linguistic minorities. We're talking in terms of religious minorities. She's talking of all set of communities who are...
Venkatesh, I am burdened. I can't carry this. It's very heavy.
It's something which we have been going through. I think this flooding is subject of discussion. This series which we are having on this particular aspect is meant for trying to bring a kind of an understanding and awareness on the myriad ways which flooding takes place in our society. It's not just one act. It's not just one act. It's not that it's only the physical violence. There's so many ways this violence is unleashed on people. That's something which affects us. That's something which we need to understand. That's something we need to articulate and address. I think this is the reason why we have been having this series for last 9 months. We'll continue on this particular subject. In fact, we have been so happy today that we have someone like Mamta who virtually lives the poetry. In fact, all that I wanted to say regarding the kind of angst she expressed it, whether it is through Charin's poetry, whether it is Faiz's poetry, whether it is Siraj Bisrali's poetry, our own person from Canada who has been persecuted for telling the truth, singing a song, and just reciting a poem. He can be persecuted. He had to seek bail, and the court rejected the bail. In the first instance, he had to go and surrender himself for securing bail. This we see in our country happening. I think that's something which is a cause of concern, and it should be a cause of our concern, just one person. I think these are the areas, these are the issues that we need to articulate. These are the issues we need to talk about. In fact, there are forums which are available for that, but we need to create that kind of today much more. In fact, we are looking for much more discussion on this. I want you people to even look into what we have got. Saying the Reach Lawyer has a number of ways of doing it. We are planning with various social media interventions. We're on Facebook. Please come and join on the Facebook page. Look at our content which is on the Facebook page. On the YouTube channels which we are going to develop, we are also requesting people to participate in. This is a process through which we are trying to engage with the people. We are trying to make this space available for the people who want to talk about it. And we're going to get one of the best experts who are going to come and participate in it. And today we had the great advantage of someone like Mamata, who could explain the nuances of this particular issue of pillorying. She did not just go into one segment, she expands of the whole issue and tried to put forward that how that the concern, the angst is expressed, exactly is felt. In fact, what I could not speak, that the feeling of an individual, of a poet, the poet within, and that spoke today to us. I think that was very essential for a better understanding what goes to the mind of a poet. I think that's something which is an extraordinary day today. I don't know how to thank Mamta for it. Thank you for setting one of the finest poetry. It was so much. We have exceeded our time. Doesn't matter. Time is our choice. So Prerna may be saying that, okay, we have moved out of the clock, but it doesn't matter because these are the times we need to sit and keep talking, listening, understanding, trying to see what exactly the kind of society we live in, what is the kind of society we want, what is the kind of issues which we need to address. I think when we see this kind of bigotry, we can see that kind of issues which offend us through various medium, it's necessary that we should have space for opportunities of this kind of articulation. We have great number of Mamtas around with us, not one on various subjects. We need to hear them. Their voices need to be heard. Their voices need to reach large number of people. In fact, that's one of the major reasons where we have come with this Reach Lower Friday talk. Every Friday evening, 6 to 7:15, 7:30, we may extend, it's our choice. We are going to come and explain all these aspects, discuss all these aspects. And this is something which we would like to see that all of you participate, understand, watch, and you please respond to us. You can send messages to us, you can tweet to us, you can send it through a Facebook or comment on our Reach to our YouTube channel. Look at all these things and come with us, give suggestions so that we can invite the best of the people, try to come and articulate the rights, articulate on the issues, articulate on what exactly affects our society. We love our country. We are madly in love with our country. We are madly in love with human rights. Humanity as it is concerned. We are a country which talks in terms of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. When we talk of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the whole world is my family. So I feel that whole world is my family. When I make a statement, I would like to live that. So to live that, there is a requirement of better understanding of that. We need to come with a parochial attitude. We need to come out of all these kind of dissensions in the society. We all need to come out of all these kind of discriminations, kind of situations, structures which we have built, which are going to be such oppressive systems that we have built. I think we need to break all of them and make ourselves more human. I think that's a process which we would like to do. Thank you, Prerna. And this is an opportunity to thank all of you who have been giving us this kind of support to run this program. Yes.
I thoroughly enjoyed this evening. Thanks a lot for listening to me. And I love reading poems, not just mine, poems from all over the world.
Thank you so much. This has been a very, very interesting conversation. I hope everyone that's taken some time out to hear us out today, I hope you guys learned something and enjoyed it too. And hopefully you will join us for next week's sessions as well. We'll keep coming up with interesting things and to keep the conversation going. So thank you so much for everybody and for Saurabh for being behind the scenes. So thank you. Have a great evening.